The dust-laden wind carried whispers of tragedy as Tabitha Sullivan stumbled across the barren desert. Her once pristine blue calico dress now tattered and caked with the grit of 3 days' desperate travel. The year was 1871, and the Arizona Territory showed no mercy to those who wandered its vast emptiness unprepared. Her lips were cracked, her throat parched, and her eyes stung from the relentless sun beating down upon her fair skin, now reddened and blistered. She had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and the locket containing her mother's portrait, the only remnant of a life violently torn away when raiders attacked their homestead. The horizon wavered in the heat as Tabitha's knees finally buckled beneath her. She had been running since witnessing her father's murder, since escaping the men who had pursued her with intentions that made her blood run cold even in this scorching heat. Her body trembled with exhaustion, and tears mixed with sweat as they streamed down her dirt-streaked face. "I can't." She whispered to the indifferent desert, "I can't go any further." The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered in her failing consciousness. A dark silhouette appeared against the setting sun, growing larger as it approached. Tabitha's heart raced with renewed terror. Had they found her after all? With the last of her strength, she attempted to rise and flee, but her legs betrayed her, and she collapsed once more into the unforgiving earth. "Easy there, miss." The voice was deep, steady, and surprisingly gentle. "You'll rest before you fall again." Strong arms lifted her as if she weighed nothing more than a child, and she found herself being placed carefully atop a horse. Through half-closed eyes, she glimpsed a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, concern etched in the lines around piercing blue eyes. "My dress." She mumbled, embarrassed by her disheveled state even in her delirium. "Your dress is soaked with sweat and tears," the cowboy said matter-of-factly, "but that's the least of your worries right now. Name's Kyle Keller, and I'm taking you to safety." Tabitha wanted to protest, to explain, to flee, but the world dimmed around her as exhaustion claimed its due. The last sensation she registered was the secure feeling of an arm around her waist, holding her firmly in the saddle as they rode away from the setting sun. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The softness of a real bed beneath her, the cool touch of a damp cloth against her forehead, the subtle scent of coffee and wood smoke. Tabitha's eyes fluttered open to find herself in a modest but clean cabin. Sunlight filtered through calico curtains, casting a warm glow across rough-hewn furniture. "You're awake." The same deep voice from before drew her attention to a tall figure by the doorway. In the clear light of day, she could see him properly broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with that particular kind of strength that comes from a lifetime of hard work, rather than vanity. His face was sun-weathered but handsome in a rugged way, with those same striking blue eyes that had been her last memory before losing consciousness. Tabitha instinctively pulled the quilt higher, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. "Where am I? How long have I been here?" "My ranch about 15 miles northeast of Silver Creek. You've been out for nearly 2 days." He approached slowly, as one might a spooked horse, and set a cup of water on the small table beside the bed. "Name's Kyle Keller, though I already told you that. You probably don't remember." "I remember," she said quietly, reaching for the water with a shaking hand. "I'm Tabitha Sullivan," Kyle nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "Mrs. Alvarez from town came by to tend to you, changed you into one of my sister's old nightgowns. Your dress was, well, beyond saving, I'm afraid." Tabitha flushed with embarrassment and gratitude. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Keller." "Kyle," he corrected. "And no thanks needed. Couldn't leave you out there to die." His expression darkened. "You want to tell me what a young woman was doing wandering alone in that stretch of desert?" "It's not the kind of place anyone ends up by accident." The memories crashed over her with devastating clarity, her father's blood soaking into the dusty yard, the flames consuming their small homestead, the terrifying chase that followed. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, and a broken sob escaped her lips. Kyle's expression softened immediately. You don't have to speak of it now. Rest, heal. There's time enough for stories later. Over the next few days, Tabitha regained her strength slowly. Kyle proved to be a surprisingly competent cook, though he apologized repeatedly for the simplicity of the meals. He brought her books from his modest collection when she expressed boredom and procured some clothes from town's simple but practical dresses that fit her well enough. On the 5th day, sitting on the small porch watching Kyle work with a spirited young mare in the corral, Tabitha finally found the courage to share her story. He listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation of the violence she had witnessed and narrowly escaped. "They were after our land," she concluded, voice hollow with the telling. "My father refused to sell, said our small ranch was all he had left of my mother. They killed him for it, burned everything we had." Kyle's hands tightened on the porch railing. "These men have names." "Blackwell was what they called their leader," Tabitha replied, the name bitter on her tongue. "Franklin Blackwell. He works for the railroad, or so he claimed. The others, I don't know. There were 5 of them altogether." Kyle nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "The railroad's been buying up land all through this territory one way or another. Some men have forgotten there's law out here now." He hesitated, then added, "Sheriff Dalton in Silver Creek is a good man. We should ride in, report what happened." Tabitha shook her head violently. "No. These men have money, influence. What if the sheriff can't protect me?" "What if, then I will," Kyle said simply, as if promising nothing more complicated than bringing in firewood. The quiet certainty in his voice made something flutter in Tabitha's chest. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Kyle turned to face her fully, those blue eyes intent. "I know enough. I know you're brave, surviving what you did. I know you're strong, even if you don't feel it right now." His weathered hand covered hers briefly. "And I know that no one deserves what happened to you and your father." That night, lying in the bed that Kyle had insisted she keep while he slept on a pallet by the fireplace, Tabitha felt something unfamiliar stir within her, something beyond grief and fear. It was a fragile thing, like the first green shoot after a wildfire, but undeniably there. Hope. The next morning, Kyle announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. "You're welcome to come along," he offered, "or stay here if you prefer. Ranch is remote enough. Nobody comes this way without business." Tabitha hesitated. The thought of facing strangers terrified her, but remaining alone seemed equally daunting. "I'll come," she decided finally. "I can't hide forever." The ride to Silver Creek took nearly 2 hours. As they approached, Tabitha grew increasingly anxious, pulling the borrowed bonnet lower over her face. Kyle seemed to sense her discomfort and guided his horse closer to hers. "Town's small," he assured her. "Mostly decent folk. We'll see the sheriff first, then get what we need and head back." Silver Creek proved to be little more than a wide spot in the road, a single dusty main street lined with wooden buildings in various states of repair. A general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other establishments served the surrounding ranches and farms. Several people called greetings to Kyle as they passed, eyeing Tabitha with undisguised curiosity. At the sheriff's office, a graying man with kind eyes listened attentively to Tabitha's account, making notes and asking occasional questions. Sheriff Dalton's expression grew grave when she described the men responsible. "Blackwell, you say?" He exchanged a significant look with Kyle. "He's been causing trouble all through this territory. Works for the Eastern and Western Railroad as their land acquisition specialist, which is just a fancy way of saying he bullies people off their property." The sheriff sighed heavily. "I'll send telegrams, see if we can't get the territorial marshals involved. These railroad men think they're above the law, but they're not. Not yet, anyway." As they left the sheriff's office, Tabitha felt a strange mixture of relief and renewed fear. Giving voice to her ordeal had unburdened her somewhat, but the reality of Blackwell's influence made her vulnerable position all too clear. Kyle seemed to read her thoughts. "Sheriff Dalton's a good man, like I said, but until these men are caught, you're welcome to stay at my place." He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. "That is, if you've nowhere else to go." "I have nothing and no one," Tabitha admitted quietly. "My mother's family is back east, but we lost touch years ago after she died." Kyle nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then it's settled. Let's get those supplies." At the general store, Mrs. Peterson, a plump woman with shrewd eyes, took one look at Tabitha's borrowed dress and immediately produced fabric, patterns, and a range of necessities that made Tabitha protest weakly at the expense. "Nonsense," Kyle said, waving away her objections. "You need proper things of your own." While Mrs. Peterson gathered the items, Tabitha wandered the store, fingering bolts of calico and small luxuries like hair ribbons and scented soap that had once been commonplace in her life. The normalcy of it all, shopping in a general store after everything that had happened, struck her as so absurd that she nearly laughed aloud. "First time I've seen Kyle Keller in here buying ladies' things," Mrs. Peterson remarked casually as she wrapped their purchases. "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Good man. Keeps to himself mostly since his sister married and moved to California." Tabitha felt a blush creeping into her cheeks. "He's been very kind, yes, and handsome too, if a bit rough around the edges." Mrs. Peterson's eyes twinkled. "Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him over the years, but he never seemed interested, too busy with that ranch of his." The information lodged in Tabitha's mind as they left the store, painting Kyle in a new light. She studied him covertly as he loaded their purchases onto the packhorse. There was an effortless competence to his movements, a quiet dignity in the way he nodded to passers, by neither seeking attention nor avoiding it. As they prepared to depart, a commotion from the saloon across the street drew their attention. A group of well-dressed men emerged, laughing loudly. One voice rose above the others, smooth as silk but with a cold edge that made Tabitha's blood freeze in her veins. "By year's end, gentlemen, the railroad will run straight through Silver Creek, and property values will triple for those wise enough to invest now." Tabitha instinctively stepped behind Kyle, her heart hammering. The speaker was a tall man with carefully pomaded hair and an expensive suit. Even without seeing his face clearly, she recognized the commanding posture and calculating voice. "Blackwell," she whispered, clutching Kyle's arm. Kyle's entire body tensed, but he placed a steadying hand over hers. "Get on your horse," he said quietly. "Don't look in their direction. We're leaving now." With trembling hands, Tabitha mounted as quickly as dignity would allow. Kyle swung into his saddle beside her, positioning himself between her and the men across the street. They rode out of town at a deliberate pace, not so fast as to attract attention, but without lingering. Only when Silver Creek had vanished behind them did Tabitha release the breath she'd been holding. "He's here," she said unnecessarily. "He's right here in Silver Creek." "And now we know it," Kyle replied grimly. "That's information worth having." He glanced at her pale face. "I won't let him harm you, Tabitha. I give you my word." The sincerity in his voice made her want to believe him, despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "You can't stand against men like that alone, Kyle. They killed my father. They'll think nothing of killing you too." "I'm not alone," he said. "And neither are you. Not anymore." The simple declaration warmed something inside her that had been cold since the attack. It was more than just the promise of protection. It was the affirmation that she mattered to someone again. Back at the ranch, the routine they established over the next weeks gave Tabitha a desperately needed sense of normalcy. With the supplies from town, she threw herself into making the cabin more comfortable, cooking meals, and sewing new clothes for herself. Kyle taught her to shoot his spare revolver, insisting she practice until her aim was true and her hands didn't shake. "I hope you never need this skill," he told her, "but out here, it's as necessary as knowing how to start a fire or ride a horse." Tabitha discovered she had a natural aptitude for it, which surprised them both. The weight of the gun in her hand was a constant reminder of danger, but also, paradoxically, gave her a growing sense of control over her own safety. As June turned to July, the summer heat intensified, making the days long and the work harder. Kyle rose before dawn to tend the cattle and horses, returning midday when the sun was highest, then working again until dusk. Tabitha found herself watching for his return, her heart lightening at the sight of him riding toward the cabin. One evening, as they sat on the porch enjoying a rare cool breeze, Kyle spoke of his past for the first time. He'd come west with his parents and sister as a boy, he explained, building this ranch from nothing. Disease had taken both parents within 2 years of each other, leaving Kyle, barely 20, to raise his teenage sister and run the struggling ranch. Catherine married a storekeeper from California 5 years ago, he said. She writes often, has 2 little ones now, keeps asking when I'm going to find myself a wife. His gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains, but Tabitha didn't miss the slight color that rose in his tan cheeks. "And what do you tell her?" Tabitha asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Kyle's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "I tell her some things can't be rushed." The moment stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither was ready to name. Finally, Kyle cleared his throat and stood. "Got an early start tomorrow. New fence on the north pasture won't build itself." Tabitha watched him go, her emotions in turmoil. She had come to care deeply for this quiet, honorable man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return. But the shadow of Blackwell and his men loomed over any thoughts of the future. How could she consider happiness when justice remained undone? When any life she built might be destroyed again in an instant 2 days later, Sheriff Dalton rode up to the ranch just before sunset, his expression grave. Kyle met him in the yard, and they spoke in low voices that Tabitha couldn't make out from the porch. When Kyle finally brought the sheriff inside, Tabitha knew immediately that something was wrong. "Miss Sullivan," Sheriff Dalton greeted her, removing his hat. "I'm afraid I have news that might be distressing." Tabitha's hands clenched in the folds of her skirt. "Tell me plainly, please." "The territorial marshal investigated your father's murder. Found evidence, even had witnesses come forward, ranch hands who'd seen what happened but were too scared to speak up initially." The sheriff paused, his weathered face troubled. They were prepared to testify against Blackwell and his men. The past tense wasn't lost on Tabitha. Were. 3 days ago, the witnesses were found dead, made to look like a saloon brawl gone wrong. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "And the evidence collected from your homestead disappeared from the marshal's office during a convenient fire that destroyed only those specific documents." Kyle's hand came to rest on Tabitha's shoulder, steadying her as the implications sank in. "He's going to get away with it," she whispered. "The marshal hasn't given up," Sheriff Dalton assured her, though his tone lacked conviction. "But Blackwell has powerful friends. The railroad company is backing him completely, claiming he was nowhere near your property when the attack occurred." "He was there," Tabitha said fiercely. "I saw him give the order to burn our home. And your testimony would be valuable," the sheriff acknowledged. "But it would also put you in grave danger. Blackwell doesn't know you survived, or at least, he doesn't know where you are. That's the only advantage we have right now." After the sheriff departed, promising to return if there were any developments, Tabitha sat motionless at the table, staring blindly at her untouched dinner. Kyle watched her with concern. "You should eat something," he said gently. "How can I?" Her voice broke. "My father is dead, our home is ashes, and the men responsible will never face justice. Meanwhile, I'm hiding here, letting you risk your life by harboring me." "I'm not harboring you," Kyle interrupted, his tone sharper than she'd ever heard it. "You're here because I want you here." "Because he stopped abruptly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Tabitha looked up, startled by the emotion in his voice. "Because you what?" Kyle met her gaze, something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. "Because I care about you, Tabitha. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances. But there it is." The confession hung between them, altering the very air in the room. Tabitha's heart pounded in her chest as Kyle continued, his words coming faster now as if a dam had broken. I know the timing is all wrong. You're grieving, you're afraid, and the last thing you need is this. But I can't pretend anymore. These past weeks with you here, despite everything else, have been the happiest I've known in years. Tabitha rose from her chair, moving toward him as if drawn by an invisible force. Kyle. You don't need to say anything, he said quickly. I don't expect you to feel the same. I just wanted you to know that you're not a burden, you're not an obligation, you're— He paused, searching for words. You're the woman I think about from the moment I wake until I close my eyes at night. Tabitha stood before him now, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, to count the small lines at their corners from years squinting in the sun. Without consciously deciding to do it, she reached up and laid her palm against his cheek. His skin was warm and slightly rough with evening stubble. I think about you too, she admitted softly. When you're out working, I watch for you. When you're near, I feel safe for the first time since everything. It terrifies me because I've already lost so much. The thought of caring for someone only to lose them. Kyle's hand came up to cover hers. I can't promise what will happen tomorrow, Tabitha. No one can, but I can promise that as long as there's breath in my body, I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. To make you happy if you'll let me try. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration fraught with emotion. When they parted, Tabitha found herself trembling, not with fear but with the overwhelming intensity of feelings long suppressed now breaking free. Kyle's arms encircled her, strong and secure, and for a moment the specters of the past receded. We'll figure this out, he murmured against her hair. Together. The fragile peace they had found was shattered 3 days later, when a rider from town brought news that turned their world upside down. Blackwell and his men were systematically visiting every ranch and homestead in the county, claiming to be conducting railroad surveys but actually searching for something or someone. They're looking for me, Tabitha said hollowly after the messenger had departed. They must have realized I survived. Kyle's expression was grim as he checked the ammunition in his rifle. They won't find you. We'll leave tonight, head north to my sister's place in California. No, Tabitha's voice was surprisingly steady. I won't run anymore. I won't let them drive me from another home. She looked around the cabin that had become so dear to her. I won't let them take this from us. Tabitha, be reasonable. These men are killers. I know exactly what they are, she interrupted. I've seen it firsthand. But if we run now, we'll never stop running. They'll always have this power over us. Her eyes blazed with determination. There has to be another way. That night, they formulated a plan desperate, dangerous, but offering the slim possibility of justice rather than the certainty of a life in hiding. If Blackwell was searching for her, they would use that to their advantage. The trap would be set, not at Kyle's ranch, but at her father's burned-out homestead, where it had all begun. Sheriff Dalton will help, Kyle said, mapping out the details. So will some of the ranchers who have had their own run-ins with Blackwell. Men who owe me favors, who are tired of the railroad bullying everyone. It's too risky, Tabitha protested, even as she recognized the logic of the plan. These men have already killed witnesses, destroyed evidence. Because they worked in secret, picking off isolated targets one by one. Kyle took her hands in his. This time, they'll be the ones walking into a trap with multiple witnesses lying in wait. If we can catch them in the act of attempting to harm you using me as bait, Tabitha finished for him. I don't like that part either, Kyle admitted, but you'll be protected. I'll be there, hidden but close enough to reach you in seconds if needed. 2 tense days of preparation followed. Sheriff Dalton recruited trusted men who positioned themselves strategically around the charred remains of the Sullivan homestead. Kyle coached Tabitha relentlessly on her role, where to stand, what to say, when to move to safety. They rehearsed every detail until Tabitha could have played her part in her sleep, though sleep itself proved elusive as the day approached. On the morning of the trap, Kyle held Tabitha close, his embrace conveying what words could not: fear, determination, and above all, a love that had grown stronger with each passing day despite the shadow hanging over them. "Remember," he told her, "no matter what happens, get to the root cellar. It survived the fire and the entrance is hidden by debris. You'll be safe there until I come for you." Tabitha nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "And you remember your promise, don't be a hero. If something goes wrong, we all retreat." The ride to her former home was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The sight of the burned ruins hit Tabitha with unexpected force, the blackened timbers of what had been her childhood home, the scorched earth where her father had fallen. Grief welled anew, but with it came a steely resolve. "This ends today," she whispered to herself as Kyle squeezed her hand one last time before disappearing to his hiding place. Alone among the ruins, Tabitha began the performance of her life. She moved through the debris, picking up charred remnants of her former existence, a twisted metal frame that had been a mirror, the melted remains of her mother's prized china teacup. Her genuine tears added authenticity to the scene of a daughter returning to the site of tragedy. The wait stretched interminably. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the exposed ruins. Sweat trickled down Tabitha's back, dampening the simple dress she had chosen, deliberately similar to the one she had worn when fleeing, now soaked through just as it had been that terrible day. When hoofbeats finally sounded in the distance, Tabitha's heart leapt to her throat. She forced herself to continue her melancholy inspection of the ruins, giving no sign she had heard their approach. 5 riders crested the hill, and even at a distance, Tabitha recognized the distinctive silhouette of Franklin Blackwell at their lead. Fear clawed at her insides, memories of that night threatening to overwhelm her. She fought them back, focusing instead on the plan, on Kyle hidden nearby, on the justice that might finally be within reach. The riders slowed as they neared the property, clearly surprised to find anyone at the abandoned site. Blackwell signaled to his men to hang back as he approached alone, his expression shifting from surprise to calculating interest as he recognized Tabitha. "Well, well," he called out, his cultured voice carrying easily across the charred yard. "Miss Sullivan, isn't it? We thought you'd perished in this unfortunate accident." Tabitha straightened, letting him see her face clearly. "There was no accident, Mr. Blackwell. You murdered my father and burned our home." Blackwell dismounted, his movements unhurried, confident. Serious accusations from a distraught young woman. Grief can play terrible tricks on the memory, you know. He stepped closer, and it took every ounce of Tabitha's courage not to retreat. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private. I'm sure we can come to an understanding." "The only understanding I want is to see you hang for what you've done," Tabitha said, her voice stronger than she felt. Blackwell's false charm vanished like smoke. "That's not going to happen. What is going to happen is you're going to come with us quietly, and then you're going to disappear. Permanently this time." He gestured to his men, who began to dismount. "It's a shame, really. You're quite lovely under different circumstances." His hand shot out, grabbing Tabitha's wrist with bruising force. She cried out, partly in pain but mostly as the signal they had arranged. Before Blackwell could react, the sound of rifles being cocked echoed around them as Sheriff Dalton and 6 armed men emerged from their hiding places. "Let her go, Blackwell," the sheriff commanded. "You're under arrest for the murder of Joseph Sullivan, arson, and now attempted kidnapping." Blackwell's face contorted with rage. "You have nothing on me. It's her word against mine, and my company, your company has disavowed any knowledge of your actions," came a new voice as a well-dressed man Tabitha didn't recognize stepped into view. "The Eastern and Western Railroad doesn't condone murder, Mr. Blackwell. Your services are terminated, effective immediately." Fury and disbelief warred on Blackwell's face. With a sudden, violent motion, he yanked Tabitha against him, drawing a hidden derringer from his coat. "Back off, all of you, or she dies right here." Time seemed to slow. Tabitha felt the cold press of metal against her temple. She saw the horror on the faces of the men surrounding them. And then, from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of movement from the ruins of the barn Kyle, moving with the silent grace of a predator, approaching from behind. Making a swift decision, Tabitha went limp in Blackwell's grasp, as if fainting from fear. The sudden deadweight made him stagger, his attention diverted for the crucial second Kyle needed. There was a sickening crack as Kyle's rifle butt connected with Blackwell's skull, and suddenly, Tabitha was free, being pulled away to safety as the sheriff's men converged. Blackwell's accomplices, seeing their leader fall and themselves outnumbered, surrendered without further resistance. As Blackwell was dragged to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his temple, he fixed Tabitha with a gaze of pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you." Kyle stepped forward, placing himself between Blackwell and Tabitha. "No, Blackwell, the only regret here is that the law won't let me deal with you the way you deserve." His voice was deadly calm. "But know this, if you ever come near her again, if you ever send anyone after her, if I ever even hear you spoke her name, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in." As the prisoners were led away, the tension drained from Tabitha so suddenly that her knees buckled. Kyle caught her before she could fall, gathering her close. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "It's finally over." But Tabitha knew it wasn't quite over yet. There would be a trial, testimony to give, painful memories to relive. Justice was in sight, but the path remained difficult. "Take me home, Kyle," she whispered, surprising herself with how naturally the word home came to her lips when speaking of his ranch. Kyle's arms tightened around her. "Home," he agreed softly. "That's exactly where we're going." The trial of Franklin Blackwell and his men became the sensation of the territory, drawing journalists from as far away as Chicago. Tabitha's testimony was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, her clear, unwavering account of that terrible night moving many in the courtroom to tears. Kyle remained by her side throughout, his steady presence giving her the strength to face her father's killers day after day. When the verdict finally came guilty on all counts, Tabitha felt not the jubilation she had expected, but a quiet, solemn relief. No punishment could bring her father back or restore what had been taken from her. But as the judge pronounced the sentence hanging for Blackwell lengthy prison terms for his accomplices, she felt the first true stirrings of closure. Outside the courthouse, as autumn painted the distant mountains with gold and crimson, Kyle took her hands in his. "It's done now," he said. "You're free to decide what comes next, if you want to go back east to your mother's family or start fresh somewhere else entirely." Tabitha pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping the words she couldn't bear to hear. "Don't you know by now, there's nowhere else I want to be except with you?" She gazed up at him, letting him see everything in her heart. "I love you, Kyle Keller. I think I have since that first day when you found me in the desert and said I needed to rest." Kyle's face transformed with a smile that made her breath catch. "I've been trying to find the right moment to ask you something," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a simple gold band. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Tabitha, but I know what I feel. I love you. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tabitha's vision blurred with tears as he knelt before her, heedless of the dusty street and curious onlookers. "Tabitha Sullivan, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her, lifting her clear off her feet in his joy. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek, with Sheriff Dalton giving the bride away and half the county in attendance. The ranch that had been Kyle's solitary domain for so long transformed under Tabitha's touch, becoming truly a home. The nightmares that had plagued her gradually faded, replaced by dreams of the future they would build together. Spring brought new life to the land, and the news that their family would grow before the year's end. Kyle's fierce protectiveness only intensified with Tabitha's pregnancy, though she teased him gently about it. "I'm carrying a child not made of glass," she reminded him one evening as he insisted on doing chores she was perfectly capable of managing. Kyle's hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, his expression one of wonder and trepidation. "Can't help it," he admitted. "The thought of anything happening to either of you." Tabitha covered his hand with her own. "Nothing will happen, we're safe now, free to live and love without looking over our shoulders." When their daughter was born in late autumn, Catherine Josephine Keller, named for Kyle's sister and Tabitha's father, the last shadows seemed to lift from their lives. The baby thrived, bringing new joy to the ranch with her curious nature and ready smile. Years passed, and the Keller ranch prospered. A son joined their daughter 2 years later, followed by twin girls who kept them all on their toes with their mischievous antics. The railroad eventually came through Silver Creek, but on terms negotiated fairly with local landowners, the abuses of the Blackwell era serving as a cautionary tale of corporate overreach. On their 10th anniversary, Kyle surprised Tabitha with a special gift, a newly built gazebo overlooking the valley, the perfect spot to watch the sunset together. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked as they sat side by side, his arm around her shoulders. "How differently things might have turned out if I hadn't been riding that particular stretch of desert that day." Tabitha leaned into his embrace, considering. "I believe we were meant to find each other," she said finally. "Not that what happened was meant to be. I'd give anything to have my father back. But out of that tragedy came this life we've built, these children we adore, this love between us that only grows stronger." She turned to face him, touching his cheek gently. "And I wouldn't trade what we have for anything in this world." Kyle kissed her then, with all the tenderness and passion that had sustained them through hardship and joy alike. As the sun set over the land that was truly theirs, Tabitha Sullivan Keller knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home not in a place, but in the heart of the man who had once told her she needed to rest before she fell again. That man, her husband, had caught her when she fell, helped her find justice when it seemed impossible, and given her a love that had healed wounds she thought would never mend. Together, they had transformed a desperate meeting in the desert into a lifetime of happiness neither could have imagined alone. "I love you," she whispered against his lips as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Forever and always." "Forever and always," Kyle echoed, holding her close as night fell gently around them, their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the western sky.